Hello, church, and it's great to be here. It's great to see faces that we can remember from years ago when we were actually members of this church before we moved to Andover. So if you're one of those people, a very special hello, and the rest of you, we hope we'll get to know you afterwards. So, I bring greetings from St Mary's, which is the parish church in Andover, where we live, and from all the saints there. I bring greetings from our head office for Open Doors, which is in Witney, and we would like to thank you for your continued support. It is really, really appreciated. And I bring greetings, of course, from the persecuted church, because whenever we meet persecuted Christians, they always say, please thank the people that you talk to for their support. It is greatly appreciated. At the current time, our focus at Open Doors is on India. So at the moment, India is going through a general election. General elections are long, they're complicated, they're protracted, and this one will go on until the 1st of June, which is good for us because it gives us loads of time to plug into the power of prayer and actually have some influence on what is going on. So the ruling party at the moment is called the BJP, and when they, in their manifesto, when they were coming into power, they said that they were going to rid India of everybody who was not a Hindu by the end of 2022. And some of you may remember me standing here and saying you could plug into the power and you could change that. Well, obviously we did change that because that didn't happen. There are still Christians, Muslims, animists in India, and that's good. Clearly it didn't happen, but it led to a change in thinking, and it led to an escalation of violence. So, for instance, in 2023, in a place called Manipur, 4,500 buildings and homes belonging to Christians, plus 400 churches were destroyed. That's huge, and that is an unusual number, but it shows you the strength of feeling that is developing in some people in India. A year later, those dear sisters and brothers are still without housing, still without jobs, still without food, and Open Doors is we're providing food, but we're also trying to help in other ways. We are there helping them. This is what Open Doors does to support persecuted Christians. As always, it seems, women are particularly vulnerable, they're particularly unsafe. And it is apparently okay to rape Christian women. It's okay to beat them up. And we heard of one lady who was beaten up, left to die where she fell in the street. And fortunately, a good Samaritan came along. He took her to the local hospital. The local hospital spoke to her. They refused medical aid because she was a Christian. She wasn't Hindu. And if you're not a Hindu, then you're not Indian. And you're not entitled to medical aid. You're not entitled to education. You're not entitled to general amenities. 12 of the states of India have anti-conversion laws. So this means that it is against the law to convert from Hinduism to any other religion, Christian, Muslim, animist. But it's all right to change from those things to Hinduism because that's called returning home. Whilst every state doesn't have that law, every state does have a law against forcefully converting someone. So if Chris walks up to you and talks to you about Jesus, he's forcefully converting you, even though it's just a conversation. And this law has led to church leaders and believers being hounded. In 2023, more than 2,300 leaders and believers were arrested and detained for forceful conversion. And Pastor Laxman was one of those pastors that was detained. And if God is with me this morning, there will be a video now that we will be able to show you.
पासबान बनने से पहले मुझे नहीं पता था कि एक साधारण से कोरे कागज का टुकड़ा मुझे अदालत पहुंचा सकती है। जिस रविवार के दिन मुझे गिरफ्तार किया गया, उन्होंने मुझसे कहा वे मेरी जान ले लेंगे। मदद करने वाला कोई नहीं था। जो लोग अंधियारे में चल रहे थे, उन्होंने बड़ा उजियाला देखा। मेरी पत्नी बहुत बीमार थी। मैं सब कोशिश कर लिया था। मेरी उम्मीद टूट रही थी। मुझे एक कलीसिया के बारे में बताया गया। हम वहां गए और विश्वासियों ने मेरी पत्नी के लिए प्रार्थना की। वो तुरंत चंगाई पाई। उस क्षण से मैंने विश्वास किया। मुझे एक गहरी शांति मिली और मेरा पूरा जीवन सदा के लिए बदल गया। मुझे प्रभु से एक दर्शन मिला कि मैं पूरे समय सेवकाई करूं। उसने मुझे कलीसिया शुरू करने के लिए एक जगह दिखाई, एक गांव जिसमें एक पाठशाला थी। प्रार्थना के द्वारा हमने देखा कि परमेश्वर लोगों को चंगा कर रहे थे। हमारी कलीसिया कुछ ही लोगों से सैकड़ों तक बढ़ गई। पर कुछ ऐसे लोग थे जो ये देखकर नाराज होने लगे कि हम यीशु के पीछे चल रहे हैं। एक दिन प्रार्थना के दौरान विरोधियों ने पुलिस को आराधना में लेकर आए। उन्होंने मुझे मारा और गिरफ्तार कर लिया। वे विश्वासियों से लगातार पूछ रहे थे कि क्या मैंने उन्हें लालच दिया था और जबरदस्ती धर्म परिवर्तन कराया था। पर मेरे खिलाफ कोई सबूत नहीं था। परमेश्वर ने मुझे कहा, मत डर, क्योंकि मैं तुम्हारे साथ हूं। पुलिस ने मुझे अकेले नहीं छोड़ा। मेरी सेवकाई बंद करने के लिए उन्होंने एक विश्वासी को जबरदस्ती एक कोरे कागज पर दस्तखत करवाया। फिर उन्होंने एक झूठा बयान दिया कि मैंने उसे जबरदस्ती ईसाई बनाया है। मैं जेल में 6 दिन रहा। मैंने सोचा कि गांव वाले मुझे बचा लेंगे, पर कोई नहीं आया।
विरोधियों ने पूरी रीति से हमारे चर्च को तोड़ दिया है। अब वहाँ पे इकट्ठा होना हमारे लिए सुरक्षित नहीं है। पुलिस के जब भी मन करता है वो हमारे घर पे रेड डालने के लिए आ जाते हैं, लेकिन परमेश्वर ने हमसे वादा किया है कि हम तेरे साथ। लेकिन फिर भी उन 40 विश्वासियों से मैं चुपके से मिलने जाता हूँ। चर्च बंद हो गया है, लेकिन परमेश्वर की सेवकाई चल रही। यह परमेश्वर का काम है, इसको कोई बंद नहीं कर सकता। यह परमेश्वर के राज्य के लिए है।
So I'm sure I don't have to remind you that Pastor Laxman and others like him, they're our family. They're our brothers and sisters. So what can we do for our brothers and sisters at this great distance, living in this safe-ish place? Well, the most powerful thing you can do is pray. Plug into the power of prayer. Guided by the Holy Spirit, pray for the elections and pray for the people like the people in Manipur or like that woman who have been attacked, who have been damaged by this violent thinking. There's also an advocacy campaign which is on our website. Our website is www.opendoorsuK.org. And if you're anything like me, I couldn't even hope to remember that by the end of the service, let alone by the time I got home. So we have a table at the back, and on that table we have these little cards. These little cards will tell you our website, but they will also allow you to order, if you wish to, a free magazine. We used to give them out for free, I realise that, and I'll explain in a minute why we don't now. Or you could get a free world watch list which tells you where the worst persecution is happening. It gives you 50 countries where the worst persecution is happening. And we're not giving these things out now willy-nilly because we're trying to be careful with the money that you do give, and the printing costs have escalated. So by using these little cards, it saves some money, and if you don't want it, you don't have to have it, okay? But they're there if you would like to. So please, think about that. You could also write to Pastor Laxman or other people, and you have to do that by going online as well. Or you can give. Everything we do, because we live in this world, costs money. And you will have heard me say it before, no coin is too small, no cheque is too large. Every little helps and will go towards helping brothers and sisters around the world. The cards are on the table at the back, and also on that table we have some information, and I've brought along some of my glass art, so if you care to buy anything, all of that money goes to Open Doors as well. Right, so the reading today is from 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verses 1 to 5. Oh, you could also get a prayer diary. The prayer diary gives you something to pray for each day. We ask you to pray for 2 minutes, which isn't very long in a day, is it? Loads of these go out. If everybody pray for 2 minutes, it comes to over 6 weeks of prayer. And I know that when God has his ear bent for 6 weeks, he's going to do something, and quite often, if we're praying in his will, he does what we want him to do. Right, 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verses 1 to 5. This is in prelude to what Jeff is going to tell you in a minute. But mark this, there will be terrible times coming in the last days. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without control, brutal, not lovers of the good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying its power. have nothing to do with them.
That's a strange kind of reading, isn't it? And it is from the Bible, but you could almost take today's Sunday newspapers and probably find articles on all of those things. So without doubt, this is a message for us today. Those are the things in the world that we're living with and that our persecuted brothers and sisters are living with. And you heard Irene tell you just how bad things are in India. And India, amazingly, is it's on page 24, is number 11 on the World Watch list. So there are 10 countries where it is more difficult to be a Christian than it is in India, which is pretty scary. So this is the world we're living in, and in Romans chapter 12, Paul tries to give us an idea about how we should live in this world and how Christians around the world are living in this world. And he says, in Romans chapter 12, therefore, I used to go there was a church in Brighton called Abundant Life, and every Monday for a long time they had open meetings in a hotel on the seafront. And I went there regularly and really enjoyed it. And the minister there said, if you're reading the Bible and you come across a therefore, look to see what it's there for, which is pretty sound advice. So in this instance, chapter 12, verse 1, Paul is saying, in view of everything I've told you before, in his letter to the Romans, which is 11 chapters, where he's really telling them about how his understanding of how he became a Christian, how people follow the Lord, what God does for them, all these kind of things. He says, we've done all that, therefore, and from chapter 12 onwards, he's putting what he's told them into practical being. Therefore, I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, perfect, and pleasing and perfect will. And this is what we should be trying to do. We should be transformed. We should renew our minds so that our lives become living sacrifices to God. And this theme is echoed in many of the other letters that are written. We're told to put off the sinful nature, which is all the things that Irene read about. We're told we're a new creation. We leave alone the old world and are a new creation in God's world. Peter reinforces this idea in his first letter. As obedient children, do not conform to the evil desires when you lived in ignorance, but be transformed again. And the persecuted church do not conform because they are going against the norm. For them, committing can mean rejection, discrimination, assault, and even death, both from people within their families and from the authorities. From the family because they're bringing shame on the family. Last year, the men of our church had an away day, and the person leading the devotions said that we looked very briefly at 2 Timothy's letter, and he chose a verse from each chapter. And from chapter 1 he chose verse 7. For God did not give us a spirit of timidity, but a spirit of power, of love, and of self-discipline. And in sharing, he said the word timidity can be translated cowardice. And straight away, I thought, persecuted church. Cowardice means lacking courage in the face of danger, pain, and difficulty. And so people going to become a Christian in the Middle East, in India, in North Korea, are really making that decision in the face of danger, in pain, in difficulty. And I expect if that had been the case when I became a Christian, I wouldn't have bothered. I really wouldn't, because life was great. If I'm going to stand out like that, and I'm going to be put under extreme danger, maybe even killed, I wouldn't have done that. I'm 100% sure I wouldn't have done it. To me, Sunday school, church at that time was just a place where you met your mates. Afterwards, you go down the pub. It was just a Sunday social club. I became a Christian because I wanted to be an officer in the Boys Brigade. If you wanted to be an officer in the Boys Brigade, you had to be a church member. If you wanted to be a church member, you had to be baptized. And although I felt something, I wasn't really committed to God at that time. And I wish I could almost be baptized later on when I had made a worthwhile decision for Him. And so with that, it was just a social club. There wasn't any commitment. And I suspect that maybe when we hear and see how many of our brothers and sisters become Christian, they are totally convinced. We saw Laxman. His wife was really, really ill, and she was healed. The people we met in Bhutan, the first member of the family had been healed. When you have a dream or a vision of God, the people having those dreams and visions know with absolute certainty that there is a God. And I'm sure if we had and were given that same opportunity, we would be as totally committed instantly, just like Paul was. The word that we have translated it as, timidity, means shrinking from difficult circumstances, hesitant and fearful. And isn't that what we are? We don't want to talk to our friends about Christianity because they might laugh at us, because it might be difficult. We might be a little bit scared of their reaction. And that is much more like us, basically because no one is bothered what we think or what we believe. If we say, I believe in Jesus, they just say, oh, religious nut, and get on with their life. It makes no difference to them at all. But you can't do that in the persecuted church. And the lives that persecuted Christians are living today really parallels Jesus and the early church. Jesus spoke out against what was wrong. He stood out. He went totally against the norm. If you read the woes in Matthew 23, he calls the religious leaders of the day hypocrites, blind guides, brood of vipers. You're like whitewashed tombs. He's not messing about. He's telling them as it is, and they don't like it, and so they're looking for ways to get him. Peter on the day of Pentecost went out and speaking to the Jews said, you turned Jesus over to wicked men and you crucified him. That's not going to bring lots of these people coming into your friendship. You crucified him. When Stephen had his vision, he said, you betrayed and murdered the Christ. And that's not going to, he wasn't released, he was stoned to death and became the second martyr after Jesus. Paul was accused of turning the world upside down because he went to Corinth and came up with something brand new and exciting and different. And his detractors accused him of turning the world upside down. I believe he was turning the world the right way up. And I believe that's what God wants us to do now, to turn the world back in the way that he wants it. But unfortunately, we are the minority. But this is the story of the persecuted church. They do not conform. They do things that are out of the ordinary. So many believers are imprisoned, and yet it's in prison where God has given them their ministry. Lots of overseas prisons, a really dirty, horrible place. You're in, you're out, so nobody bothers. And you're expected to look after your own cell, but if you're only going to be there a few days, you might not even have time to do it. And Christians will go in and clean the cells, will show love to the people. They'll clean their sheets and blankets and things that are filthy dirty to make life more bearable for them. Often you have to provide your own food and people can't afford to. So Christians who are in prison will often share their food with them. They will pray for people for healing because often they're unhygienic places. They'll pray for prison guards and prison guards' families and bring people into Christ. And that makes such a difference. This showing love seems to be what the persecuted church, and by addition, Open Doors is about, by encouraging people to show love to people that aren't expecting it. And that love makes such a great difference. The persecuted church are so generous. There's still a famine going on in North Korea, so food is very short, and Christians are right at the bottom, literally, of the food chain. But they will keep back 10% of what they've got, so that if somebody who comes to them and they're in a worse state, they can give this food to them. They call it holy rice. The partner churches we have in Syria and in Iraq in particular are churches that we've been working with for a long time. We've met the pastors before the trouble started. We've built a relationship with them, and they are now designated Centres of Hope, which is a lovely, lovely name. So it's church. They worship, they meet, they teach, they instruct, but then they do something else. One church might be prolific in dealing with children. So the children who have been, if you've been in Syria and you're under 20, you've known nothing but destruction and war and bombs and ruined buildings and danger. So just to have children that can go and play and get exhausted playing football in the evening, it's a great thing to do, and churches will do that. Others will look after teenagers and try and instruct them and try and help them to become valued members of society as they go forward and grow up. We might be instructing women who are widowed and have got no means of supporting themselves with their livelihood training programs, so that they can have a business of their own, so they can have their own self-esteem and self-worth and self-respect to earn their own living and not be dependent on other people all the time. And I think those centres of hope are great, and wouldn't it be wonderful if every church in England was a centre of hope? That's what we should be doing. We know what the answer is, and there's loads of people out there that don't. And if you distill it even more, shouldn't we be centres of hope? Because we know that whatever the question, Jesus is the answer. And people out there don't know. People in our own families haven't yet realised that. Our friends haven't realised that. People in the badminton club don't know that. And we can be their centres of hope. Jesus said, go into all nations, and the word apparently is ethne. So go into every people group and tell them about the Lord. And that is turning the world upside down, showing love where it's not expected, being generous. Others, when we were in Kyrgyzstan, we'd turn up at somebody's house, and then the host or one of the family would disappear, coming back with a melon and a loaf of bread so they could share what very little they had with us, which we didn't need. But what a lovely show. We also went to a children's camp there where Muslim children were invited as well, and they got the gospel with both barrels. There was no messing about. The Muslim children went back knowing that Jesus is the one who saves. And in Sri Lanka, we've just started having football groups so that men, I doubt if women do, but certainly men and boys and youths can go and play football with Christians, and then in the aftermath, the sort of friendship evangelism, which without doubt is the most effective sort. You just plant the seed and let God do all the work, basically. And isn't being generous so much against what our society says? There you're trying to get as much money as you can. If you can make even a dodgy buck somewhere, that's all good. Everything is about me. My rights are paramount, nobody else matters. But this showing love, being generous, is so different and helps us stand out. Another thing that we can learn so much from the persecuted church is the way in which they're able to give. We have met widows who have seen their families, their husbands slaughtered before them. And because of these areas, often the people who have done that are still around the village. And yet somehow they've been able to say, I can forgive you, I can forgive this. And the persecuted church, because they're having to, have realized that basically forgiving is for the forgiver, not the forgivee. So even in our society, if somebody needs to be forgiven, often, you've got a real grudge against somebody, often the person who you need to forgive doesn't realise that. They've got no idea they even offended you. And because you've let it build up and build up and build up over weeks, months, years, and you can't stand the person, they could be totally oblivious of it. In John, Jesus says, people will kill you and believe they're doing a service to God. And that's what jihad is, isn't it? If somebody from Boko Haram goes into a Nigerian village and slaughters a family, they don't want to be forgiven by the person of the family they've slaughtered because they've been serving God. They've got no need for forgiveness. And again, the widow just harbouring hatred and wanting vengeance in their lives destroys her. The parable of the unforgiving servant finishes where the king puts the man who wouldn't forgive his brother into jail and said, set the torturers on him. And I found, and again at that church, this truth came out so clearly. The minister started speaking. It was one of those churches you knew he was going to say, if this is you, come forward. He's like, rats, I'm going to have to go forward at the end of this talk. And I did. And there was something pretty trivial, but it was like a cancer eating of me. And not forgiving has more effect on you than the person who you need to forgive. The other great thing we can learn from the persecuted church is the hope they have in heaven. I've told you before about a lady who had a real impact when she shared. She was living in Syria. She was a headmistress and she was a mother of sort of just about coming into teenage girls. And every day over her class and over her family, she would pray Psalm 91, which is saying, God is with you. And she would tell her daughters that if you're going to be killed, don't worry about it. The next face that you will see will be Jesus. And if you get the chance to say to the man, I forgive you, Jesus is the answer, do that. But if an 11-year-old girl can believe that and go about a really dangerous place, knowing that she's going to be in heaven, why can't I? You know, I have said before, I have no fear of death, because if I die, the next face I'm going to see is Jesus. And as much as I love my life on this earth, heaven is going to be so much better, beyond what we can even imagine or compare. And so, it's a fairly cheap price to pay. And throughout history, you've heard, I don't know if you've heard of Sebastian Kolbe, who was in the World War, was in Auschwitz. And the Nazis, because somebody had escaped, were going to kill 10 people. And one man cried out, my wife and daughter are still here, I don't want to do it. And this Roman Catholic priest said, I will die in your place because I've got no family here. He knew where he was going, and so he was able to do that. And after the war, the man he saved used to go around sharing the sacrifice, Coal Bay made, and he was eventually, I'm going to say sanitized, but he was made a saint. In North Korea, I think like last year Irene told you about the man that was put into an open grave virtually, and said, if you renounce Jesus, fine, if you don't, we're going to kill you. And then he put in his wife, and he said, if you don't renounce Jesus, we'll kill you both. Then he put in the family, the children, and the man was wavering. His wife said, don't you dare, tonight we will be in glory. And the grave was filled in, and we believe the family are in glory. And that is the hope that the persecuted church have, and the hope that we can have, because it's the same God, the same people, the same God, the same salvation. That's all for us. So why are the persecuted church better at standing up and standing out for Jesus than we are? They have to. If you're going to become a Christian in a Muslim family, you're going to scandalize your family. They are going to maybe put out a relative will be designated to kill you. You will certainly be shunned. You might be forced out of your home. You might be kept a prisoner in your home. But if we make that sort of decision, there's no comeback at all. Their hope and dependence seems far more focused than perhaps theirs is. A Polish philosopher said, we are asked in effect to refrain from expressing or indeed holding any opinion, and sometimes even to condone every conceivable type of behaviour in others. And that way of thinking leads to Christian values having a diminishing role day by day in policy and lawmaking, in education, in day-to-day life, and can lead us into complacency, because if we stand up, no one's going to be bothered. But the persecuted church, when they stand up and stand out, they are in big bother. And so we're told to renew our mind. And this conforming to what society is doing is being pressed in to the pattern of this world. And we're told not to do that. We should transform our minds. And what goes through our mind, every sin we can think about, can't we? We don't ever sin on the spur of the moment. It goes through our minds. And maybe that's why the spiritual armour is the helmet of salvation. So that if we put all these unhelpful thoughts through the filter of our salvation, through the cost of Jesus' sacrifice, through what it means, maybe we come up with better decisions. A verse that's made a great difference to us in recent months has been Philippians 4:8. There's lots of rubbish about, but we're told whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything excellent or praiseworthy, think about these things. And if we're doing that, and we're sort of tempted to do something wrong, we filter through what God has prayed and what this action is going to cost. Hopefully we wouldn't do that. Our minds will be renewed, and gives us the chance of being assured of these truths, being inspired by these truths, being filled with the Holy Spirit helps us to present our bodies and ourselves as living sacrifices, confident in the belief and position we have. We're children of God. God is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. We're princes and princesses of the kingdom. We're heirs of God. We are his beloved children. Everything that he's got is going to come down to us. We're ambassadors for God. Ambassadors stand in a strange land, a different world, a different country, with all the power of the kingdom they represent behind them. That's where we are. We're conquerors, and we should seek to live our lives in that light. We're not down-pressed and hard done by. We are kings, we are heirs, we have so much power that we can't be sure, we can't understand it. We are the channels God is using to win his creation for himself. He has prepared good works in advance for us to do. So anything we do, he's already prepared it. He will bring those and everything else to a glorious conclusion. We have to do very little. We let him work through us. He's set the result. He knows what the result's going to be. We can't convert anybody. I could talk to you from now until Christmas, and not one person will believe and become a Christian. It's the Holy Spirit working through the words that have been planted, through the seed that's been planted, that brings growth. Don't be conformed to the pattern of this world. Be transformed, and like Paul, we can say, I know whom I've believed in, and I'm persuaded that he can take that which I've committed to him against that day. The persecuted church are our inspiration, and I would just encourage you to get to see what's happening in the persecuted church. Where the persecution is the worst, God is doing the greatest things. All the miracles of the New Testament, pretty much, are happening today or in the last few years in the persecuted church because they trust him and are committed to him. And they are exactly the same as us. We are ordinary people who, because of the Holy Spirit, can do extraordinary things. Let's do it. Amen.